Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 18 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending August 19th, 2016. We have euphemistically called this the Olympics edition, as it's the second week of the Rio Olympics. And boy, what a set of lessons we got from Rio. I'm back as always with my cohort Jay Rosen, and we explore the week's comings and goings in FCPA compliance and ethics. We talk about the head of the EU's Olympic delegation being arrested for ticket scalping in Rio, Ryan Lochte and his imbroglio around first being robbed at gunpoint, and now he and his cohorts being arrested for filing a false police report. We talk about a recent SEC enforcement action where a company tried to prevent its employees who had left from reporting to the SEC of illegal activity and sharing in any bounty. Led to an FCC enforcement action. We talk about Keppel executives who are alleged to have known about and approved bribes paid by a third-party agent to Petrobras. We take a deep dive into the key Energy FCPA enforcement action, focusing on the steps taken by Key Energy to remediate, and specifically the SEC's language on transaction monitoring. That leads into a discussion about compliance as a business. And we conclude with the old adage, if you lie down with dogs, you're going to get fleas, by looking at the fixer hired by Och-Ziff to allegedly bribe in certain countries in Africa. The episode comes in at just over 30 minutes. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a special Thursday edition of This Week in FCPA. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome, and welcome to this special Thursday edition.
Tom, thank you for accommodating my holiday schedule. So Mr. and Mrs. Translations and Millie and Michaela are going on holiday tomorrow for a week, so that's why we get to do this one day early. Hopefully we don't cheat you on one day of FCPA news.
Well, we'll have to catch up next week if it turns out Friday is the breaking day for all FCPA and compliance and ethics related events. But Jay, we did have a few things this week that I thought were worth talking about. Today, yesterday, a story broke from Rio where there are just all sorts of compliance and ethics stories. But the one that caught my eye was the head of the Irish Olympic Committee, who'd been in that position for almost 30 years, had to take a leave of absence because he got caught scalping tickets. Oh my God, they must be some, pretty low paying salaries when the head of the committee's got to scalp tickets to make an extra buck. So
maybe he should have gone to work for FIFA and he might have been in a better financial position.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was at a meeting this week where people were complaining about the alleged corruption of the Olympic Committee. And I just shook my head and I said, have you been following the sports news at any point over the last couple of years? So anyway, but they're having a lot of problems down there. They've got polluted water. They've got sofas hanging out in sculling lanes. They heaven forbid, Olympic officials are having to wait for their personal cars to take them to venues. And then the latest, I'm not quite sure what to make of all this, but it was reported earlier this week that Ryan Lochte and 3 fellow U.S. swimmers were robbed at gunpoint in a cab. And now Brazilian authorities are not only questioning this, but they've issued warrants to talk to Mr. Lochte and his companions further, because they say it looks like this never happened. So what does a homer make of all of that? I mean, what would happen in Boston?
What would happen in Boston? I think they'd take your cell phone. So I think what's interesting about you've got 4 different people who witnessed this event, and it's turning out that their stories are differing greatly. Everything from the time of when things went down to exactly what happened. So there's probably something there. It sounded a little bit weird when it came on the news wire a couple days ago and they didn't report it, But I'm sure it's going to make for interesting reading over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I remember back when I was in law school, and the heavyweight champion of the world at one point was Leon Spinks. And Leon woke up one morning or one evening, may have been early in the morning, but still dark, and he was handcuffed to a head of a bed, and he was wearing his birthday suit. And the sports columnist who wrote about this after hearing the champion's explanation was, Leon, baby, you got rolled. And, sometimes you just get rolled, and sometimes your cab gets robbed, and sometimes it's confusing as to which one happens. So,
and as long as you've got your kidney, you're in good shape, right?
That's right. That's right. So
when you wake up in a bathtub full of ice, it's not a good thing.
No, it's not. But we did have some FCPA compliance and ethics related news. Late last week, we had a whistleblower issue come up where the SEC had sanctioned a company that was trying to keep ex-employees from participating in the alleged rewards, or possible, I should say, rewards for reporting illegal conduct. And this continues the SEC's trend, a very strong trend of companies trying to prevent their employees going to the government regulatory authorities. The SEC's come down pretty hard on that in both employment agreements and now severance agreements. We had news that out of Singapore, a shipping line, Keppel, was alleged to have paid bribes to Petrobras executives to get certain Petrobras work, and the third-party agent who is alleged to have been the bag man has now come out and said that Keppel executives authorized the bribe payments. So we'll have to kind of see how that continues. We had an interesting set of reports about the private investment fund Och-Ziff, who previously reported they were under a FCPA investigation, and they had reserved just over $400 million for a settlement, which tells you that it's a pretty serious matter. But this week, Jay, we had a report that one of their third-party representatives, I'm going to have to go to the glasses here because my print is small.
We can just call him the fixer.
The fixer. A Gabonese businessman, Samuel Medambe, I'm sure I butchered that. The fixer, yes, was arrested for paying bribes on behalf of the firm, and in several African countries. And the thing that really struck me, Jay, was that he had actually threatened to call the firm out publicly if they didn't pay him his commissions that he thought he should get for actually paying bribes. So that was kind of the, if you sleep with dogs, you're going to wake up with fleas lesson that I don't think we talk about or is talked about enough in the FCPA world. Is one of the reasons to do due diligence, obviously, is to know if you're going to go to bed with bad actors or jump into a partnership, a joint venture, or other business relationship with them. But once you pay a bribe, once you cross over that line, you have now subjected yourself to potential extortion going forward. And that extortion can be from the government official who you pay the bribe to, who could damage you both commercially but also reputationally as well. And the same holds true for the third-party representatives who may be engaged in illegal conduct. And that's, I think, an important reason to perform background due diligence. It's an important reason to know who you're doing business with, because in addition to them getting you into trouble, they can frankly extort more money from you going forward. And being a recovering screenwriter, I'm sure that's something that you would have had a lot of fun with, creating conflict around that issue.
Definitely. I was doing a little reading back on this issue, and I think initially there was something to do with Gaddafi in Libya when they were first looking into it.
Right.
And then there were a couple executives of Och-Ziff that got Wells letters out of their London office. So Again, there should not be much head scratching going on here. We're talking about, brazen bribery. And in this article back in the journal, they were really talking about negotiating the language. And I believe DOJ is really pushing for not a DPA, but to actually have them hold their hand up and say we're guilty. So I think this one really bears watching. Not only is it the fact that it's a financial concern like an investment bank, it's a hedge fund, but they're also publicly traded. So unfortunately, I don't see them having a lot of wiggle room here. And with going with that $400 million reserve, that's a pretty significant amount. I know in a couple moments we're going to delve into your thoughts this week that you did in a three-parter on Key Energy Services. And if we compare and contrast their $5 million disgorgement with a $400 million settlement, it shows there's, I think, a large degree of culpability there.
Yes, and the fixer alleged, you're absolutely right about the case originally arose from the firm's dealings in Libya. And for those who don't recall, there was an opening for Western companies into Libya after Gaddafi renounced using nuclear weapons. And many U.S. companies went whole hog into Libya. Goldman Sachs is now in trial in London over some other issues, basically churning the Libyan sovereign wealth fund to cause them to lose a lot of money. And in that trial, there have been lots of facts that have come out that might be the basis of a FCPA action of the benefits paid to and given to Libyan sovereign wealth fund officials. But these allegations regarding the fixer were for his activities in Niger, Chad, and Guinea. So unfortunately, broadening, at least publicly, of potential allegations of bribery and corruption around Och-Ziff, and we'll certainly have to watch that to see where it goes. But you're absolutely right, Jay. We had a very interesting FCPA resolution with Key Energy. Several important things that I think every compliance practitioner needs to study. First and foremost is the what I thought was a great result. I know the guys over at Key Energy. Tip of the hat to them. They did a great job getting the result they did, but it came at a significant cost. And of course, you mentioned the $5 million profit disgorgement, but reportedly they had over $40 million in investigative fees. And all of that kind of got tied in a bow in the part of the resolution that talked about the precarious financial condition of Key Energy, to the point where it's specified in the SEC administrative order that if the company filed for bankruptcy, the company would work very hard to still get the SEC the money they agreed to pay in profit disgorgement. And I'd ask you to think about that for a minute, because the order specified profit disgorgement in 2 weeks. So, that should tell everyone that Key Energy really is kind of teetering on the brink. And when you agree that the money you're going to pay in 2 weeks might be subject to a bankruptcy filing, that may mean that you are right on the verge of a bankruptcy filing. And the other thing was, and this is a cost that is not also really not talked about, but Key Energy voluntarily withdrew from all international markets, save Canada. And for the commentators who suggest that the FCPA cost is too high, I think what one of the key points of the Key Energy FCPA resolution is, if you can't do business legally under the FCPA, there is going to be a cost. And it's not the law's problem, it's your problem. It's your commercial problem. It's how you do business. But that's, if you're an energy company and you can't do business outside the U.S. or Canada, that is a significant, let me underline double score, significant cost to you in terms of potential future revenue. So lots going on there. Anything that really struck you or that you wanted to strike out at?
Well, I think I'd like to go over a finer point that you made in one of your blogs, was that in terms of what they did such a good job to get the result, but at the beginning they did not come forward. So again, their activities were alleged, the government came to them, and then one thing that we often talk about is you have only one chance to present yourself to the government and to gain credibility. And it seems that this team really took decisive action to do so. So in the past, we've had discussions of, what's the new FCPA calculus? How much do you gain by coming forward? So again, this is an incredible result that they did not come forward themselves, that they got a declination from the DOJ, that they got only a $5 million disgorgement. But the flip side is everything that they did to get to this point, they may have put the company in such precarious financial situation that, you've got a potential Arthur Anderson situation here, that in what they're going to pay out, it might end up actually bankrupting the company. So, it'll be interesting to see if somebody else can come in and shore up their balance sheet, or what can be done with Key. And to your point earlier, if they cannot successfully compete on a level playing field internationally, there's something wrong with their business model.
Right. So there were 9 or 10 factors listed in the SEC administrative order, and I would commend those to compliance officers. They study those factors. Generally, they were investigatory efforts. They were creation or enhancement of effective internal control efforts. They were efforts around training and communication, and specifically noting that the CCO got out of the corporate office and went out on the road and met with people in the front lines. It was updating the code of conduct, the written policies and procedures, and once again, this winding down of business in international locations outside of Canada and America. By doing so, that I think it's a pretty good indication that, or I would say admission or concession, that your business model is broken if you can't do business anywhere outside the U.S. or Canada without violating the FCPA. Jay, there was one other thing that really I thought was very interesting in the order, and that was on the issue of transaction monitoring. This was we of course have heard from both the DOJ and SEC previously that companies should engage in transaction monitoring. But here we had a specific example of how a company could use transaction monitoring, but it was not in the manner of looking at just sales. It was either you call it charitable donations or gifts, because it was around something that's fairly common, at least in the energy industry, where you will make a donation for a customer's raffle. Fairly standard, usually around Christmas time. But here, Key in 2012 made a $118,000 donation to Pemex's annual Christmas raffle, Christmas season celebration, with an understanding that the money would be used to purchase gifts intended for the raffle. There was a couple of problems with this right off the bat. The first one was, of that $118,000, it turned out $55,000 was designated for specific Pemex officials rather than the general employment or employee pool. The second thing was, and that should be any analysis that you would consider on a raffle request, and I've seen those, and what you need to do is look and see, is it really available for everyone? Is it given away on a ticket basis, or draw something that shows that you're not pointing to who the recipient should be. But on the transaction monitoring side, the SEC pointed out that the amount spent was 9 times the amount spent in 2010 and 26 times the amount spent in 2011 on the same project. So when you have that kind of huge increase in a spend, whether that be a marketing spend, whether that be a charitable donation spend, whether that be a raffle donation spend, whatever that is something that should be investigated or at least reviewed from the compliance perspective. And apparently the company had no ability to do that from the compliance angle. It's not even clear that the compliance department knew about it. And as the SEC pointed out in the order, this was, of course, tied to a massive increase in sales to Pemex. So it's all part of the bribery and corruption, ongoing bribery and corruption. So a big part of a little over $500,000 paid out in paid out in bribes, and $118,000 was funneled through this raffle. So pretty clearly, the company could have reviewed this. It should have raised a red flag, but in 2010, 2011, 2012, there was no mechanism by which compliance would have visibility on this. This points directly to what the SEC wants. I think they want to see you do in the Department of Justice as well. You have to have a way to monitor your transactions. So if you get a spike in any area, whether that's a sales spike, whether that's a marketing spend spike, whether that's an increase in salary spike, take a look at it from the compliance perspective. If you've got an employee who's 2,000% over projections so that they've made this massive bonus, that might be something you'd want to take a look at. If you've had a huge spike in one region in Europe driven by the sales in one province, you might want to know the reason from that. And I would suggest to you, Jay, that it's not just a compliance reason to know that. It's a good business reason.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect segue, excuse me, for your column this morning, which was really well done and called Compliance as a Business. And, I think the more and more we discuss the topic and the more and more where we see the failures are in compliance, there is a case to be made for baking compliance into every function within a corporation. So whether it's HR, whether it's marketing, whether it's production, and one of the things out there is to figure out, we've got so much big data that we can take advantage of.
Right.
And it's like, how do you tie that data? How do you take those spikes and how do you look at them? There's got to be some type of dashboard that initially could be generically for the corporation in general. And then I think what you would want to do is look at specific silos that affect your business. So to your point earlier, if there's something that is done specifically within the oil and extractive industry where you're doing a holiday raffle, then that's one of the things that you want to look at on a yearly basis and check out that spend and even see what happens quarterly. So I think, what would you say were the highlights or the things that, it's a great piece that I recommend everybody read, and we'll put it in the weekend read in the show notes, but where's the real heart that you think that can be something that corporations can immediately get to work on and start baking in to their, to their daily business?
Well, the interesting thing is that good business is in large part good compliance. So compliance is not Dr. No from the land of no saying no. It is helping the business to be run more efficiently and run, quite frankly, more profitably. And if you have the type of situation where, if we took the raffle example, if there is compliance is not going to say no to donations for a raffle. What they're going to say is, how does that tie into what we're already doing? And if you have the ability to make that determination, to get the facts quickly and make a decision, you could graft or craft a donation to a customer's Christmas fund, Christmas party that everybody gets. And even if it had been take that amount of $118,000, there's probably nothing wrong with putting that into a pot that is distributed to PMEX employees at the corporate headquarters on a worldwide basis, on a geographic basis, on a regional basis, as long as it's distributed fairly. And that's what we didn't see here. So by having that sort of compliance baked into the business, you could probably run more quickly and more efficiently and do the things that you wanted to do anyway, all in compliance with the FCPA, all documented. So that's certainly one instance that I think would be a good starting point. But as you mentioned, Jay, HR, here with HR, my suggestion is every time HR has a touch point with a pre-employee, an employee, or an ex-employee, they can have a few words about compliance. That can be in a pre-employment screening. It can be the pre-employment interview. It can be the pre-employment interview with senior executives if the candidate's going up that high. It can be in the onboarding after they become an employee. It can be a part of the quarterly, semi-annual, or annual review, both the assessment and talking about doing business ethically in compliance and in compliance with the company's code of conduct. And even if an employee is terminated, it can be part of the exit interview and certainly a part of any analysis for someone to be promoted. Those are all things HR does. They're not asking them to do anything more or new or different. But if you've got an internal control around that, once again, you have it documented. And if a regulator ever comes knocking, you can show that you've done it. So there's a variety of things you can do that I don't think are going to be costly, and I don't think are going to be excessive or even institute or initiate compliance fatigue, because they're really just business processes helping the company to do business better.
So what about, do you have any thoughts on addressing the technology angle on that? How you link the data across different business functions?
Sure. Right now, there's no real holy grail to do that. And maybe that's one of the holy grails of compliance, is to have one system that would link all of that data internally. But right now, because most companies even today have grown organically, or inorganically through mergers and acquisitions, there's still a variety of ERP systems out there. So you're going to have to pull that data and put it in some transaction monitoring tool going forward. But you've got to have compliance with visibility into that, and they have to have the ability to pull that data for marketing outside either the United States or even in high-risk areas. They have to have the ability to see the spend on third parties. They have to have the ability to see the contracts that third parties who are on the sales side of things are receiving, both in terms of their compensation. Is it a percentage of a closing of a deal? Is it an hourly rate? Is it some mixed factor? But also the description of services, so that when an invoice comes in, someone can match up the description of services with to see if it was actually done. So there's a variety of things you can do, but you've got to have a transaction monitoring tool that allows you to put that data in it, ask the appropriate queries, and go from there.
Great, thanks. I think that's a great overall roadmap, and hopefully something that we'll learn some stuff on in the upcoming conference season. Do you have any webinars coming up next week, or anything?
Actually, I have a webinar in 20 minutes. So if you're listening to this after 20 minutes from now, you will have missed a webinar. But if you want to go back and listen to it, it's with my with the Red Flag group, where we're going to take a deep dive into how do you begin the process of assessing the risks of, or categorization of, third parties from the supply chain, so that you can put a risk management system in place. It's part one of a 3-part webinar series. Next week, I'm going to have my begin my review of the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. I'll have a blog every day on a different hallmark, and I'll have a short podcast every day with that's tied to that hallmark. So I hope my listeners, fans, and others will enjoy that and have a good review of what is one of the seminal statements of an effective compliance program, the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program as laid out in the Department of Justice and SEC 2012 FCPA guidance. And yourself?
This week I was interviewed by a colleague, Alexis Bell, who has a nifty little thing that she calls the Fraudcast, and she's the fraud doctor. So we had a conversation about Mr. Translation's favorite subject on how you look at internal investigations, when are the right touch points to bring in translations, and just as it's important to have relationships with outside counsel and with forensics, if you are a global business, it's probably a great practice for you to have a relationship with a language solutions provider, not only to communicate with your global workforce, but God forbid you get one of those letters, you got somebody that's on your side that can help you get to work really quick. So probably be a couple weeks editing on that, but I'm looking forward to having that appear. And I think conference-wise, in a couple weeks, I will be in New York to attend the GIR live conference and awards, which is something I haven't done before. And then before we know it, we'll be having the best Sunday of the year where we can watch football and baseball together in Chicago at the SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute 16.
Yes, and if you haven't signed up for the SCCE's 2016 CEI, please do so. Hotel rooms are going fast. So Jay, this is a great special Thursday edition of This Week in FCPA, and I look forward to next week as well.
Thanks, Tom. Have a great weekend. And everyone, thank you for tuning in to us to learn about what happened this week and the FCPA week that was.